All right, so we all know those big English job interviews can be a little nerve-wracking, especially when it's not your first language.
Yeah, definitely.
We're going to take a deep dive into a podcast episode today all about acing those interviews.
Cool.
It's called English for Job Interviews.
Uh,
Phrases and tips to stand out.
okay.
And we'll see what we can learn to maybe feel a little bit more prepared and confident going into those interviews.
Sounds good.
So it's not just about like knowing what to say, right? It's like understanding how to use that information.
Yeah, and this podcast episode actually, it really emphasizes that. It really dives deep into how to prepare for an interview, like really understanding the company's values
Oh, that's interesting.
and then tailoring your answers to those values, to show like how you would fit in.
Like you're already speaking their language.
Exactly. Like you get it. You get what they're all about.
Yeah.
And they gave a really good example on the podcast of a student named Alex who was prepping for this tech interview and was really nervous about his English skills, but he like really took the time to understand the company's approach to problem solving.
Uh-huh.
And then in the interview, he was able to kind of frame all of his answers around, his passion for that specific kind of problem solving.
So he got the job.
Yeah, he did. He totally nailed it.
That's awesome.
And it really shows how powerful this kind of like targeted prep can be.
Yeah, definitely.
And they also give some really great practical tips too,
Oh, like what?
like practicing with a friend or even recording yourself so you can like polish up your pronunciation
Right.
and cut down on all those filler words.
Oh, yeah, the ums and ahs.
Exactly. This can be really distracting.
Yeah, I hate listening to myself on recordings, but I can see how that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's about hearing yourself like other people hear you.
Right.
But, let's move on to something that I think pretty much everybody finds kind of scary.
Okay.
Those classic interview questions.
The ones that you know are coming, but they still make you sweat a little.
Yeah. Exactly. And the podcast talked about how important it is to like really structure your responses to these questions in a way that is clear and concise and, really makes an impact.
So, like, tell me about yourself.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
I always struggle with that one.
Me too.
Like, how do you answer that without sounding like a robot or like super vague?
Well, that's where the podcast's past, present, future formula comes in.
Okay.
So instead of just listing facts about yourself, you kind of create this narrative that takes the interviewer on a journey.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just saying, I have 5 years experience in marketing,
Exactly.
you'd frame it in a more dynamic way.
Exactly. So you might say something like, I started my marketing career 6 years ago, focusing on social media strategy.
Yep.
Currently, I'm leading a team at XYZ company where I've, further developed my skills in digital campaign development.
So you're giving them context and showing them how your skills have progressed.
Right.
And then you tie it to the future
Mm-hmm.
and how you see yourself, fitting into their company.
Exactly. You could add something like, and I'm really eager to bring my experience to your company and contribute to building, a more impactful global marketing strategy.
So you're not just telling them who you are, but where you want to go.
Right. And how that aligns with their vision.
I like that it's like you're telling a story.
Exactly. It's about being engaging and memorable.
Yeah.
And then the podcast also covered other common questions like, why do you want to work here?
Ooh, yeah.
And what are your strengths and weaknesses?
Okay, those are big ones.
Yeah.
For why do you want to work here? I usually talk about the company's values and mission, but it always feels kind of generic.
Right. Well, the podcast suggested going a little deeper and focusing on a specific aspect of the company that you're like genuinely excited about.
Okay.
Maybe it's a project they're working on or a value that really resonates with you.
Yeah.
And then you could say something like, I was really impressed by your company's commitment to sustainability, and I'm excited about the opportunity to contribute my skills to such a forward-thinking organization.
I like that it shows you've done your research
Exactly.
and that you're not just, sending out a million applications.
Right. You're genuinely invested in their mission.
Okay, but what about that strengths and weaknesses question?
Oh, yeah.
That one always gets me.
Well, the podcast had a really cool technique for this one.
Oh, tell me.
They call it reframing.
Okay.
So instead of trying to disguise a weakness as a strength, you acknowledge a potential area for growth, but then emphasize, how you're being proactive and working on it.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. And they shared a story about a student named Priya who used this technique.
Oh, what happened?
Well, she was dreading the weakness question,
Yeah.
but she practiced saying, I'm actively working on improving my time management skills.
Okay.
And the interviewer was actually really impressed by her honesty and her willingness to, address that area for growth.
Wow. So she turned it into a positive.
Exactly. She showed that she's self-aware. Yeah.
and that she's committed to continuous learning.
That's great.
The podcast also emphasized that it's important to keep your answers concise.
Right.
And avoid using really complex vocabulary.
Yeah, especially when you're nervous, it's easy to overthink it.
Exactly. Clarity over complexity, especially in an interview.
All right, well, let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about something I think can really set you apart in an interview.
Okay, I'm listening.
Engaging the interviewer.
Oh, yeah, by asking thoughtful questions.
Exactly. It's so easy to get caught up in answering questions that we forget that an interview is a two-way street.
That's a really good point.
So asking questions goes beyond just getting information right.
Yeah, it's about showing that you're confident and that you've done your homework and that you're not just there to take a job, but you're actually there to contribute to their mission.
Yeah, like you're already thinking like a member of the team.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the podcast gives some really good examples of how to do that.
Okay, I'm all ears. So instead of asking generic questions, you want to focus on something specific that shows you've done your research and you're genuinely interested.
Okay, I like that.
So for example, you could ask something like, can you tell me more about the company's recent initiative to expand into the Asian market?
Okay.
Or I read about your partnership with, mention a specific organization.
Yeah,
How does this partnership contribute to your overall goal?
I love those. They're so specific.
Exactly. And it shows that you've gone beyond just, skimming their website.
Yeah, you're actually thinking critically.
Exactly. It's about having a real conversation.
I remember the podcast mentioned Diego and how he was really shy about asking questions.
Oh, yeah.
But he practiced asking, what are the next steps in the hiring process?
Right.
And it totally changed his outlook.
Sometimes even a simple question can make a huge difference.
Yeah, it shows that you're engaged and curious.
Right.
And here's a crazy stat from the podcast.
Oh, what is it?
Candidates who ask questions are remembered 50% more often than those who don't.
Wow, that's huge. I know, right?
Definitely a good reason to step up our question game.
Yeah, for sure. I'm starting to see how all these little things can really add up.
Right. It's about those subtle cues that show you're confident, you're prepared, and you're genuinely interested.
This has been so helpful.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling more prepared for my next interview.
Great.
But I know we're not done yet, right?
We still got more to cover.
Okay, bring it on.
So we've talked about the prep work,
Uh-huh.
common questions,
Right.
and engaging with the interviewer.
Yeah.
But next, we're going to tackle the really tough stuff.
Okay.
Those curveball questions.
Deep breaths, everyone.
The ones that can really throw you off balance.
All right, I'm ready for the challenge.
Let's do it. Welcome back. So before we jump into those tough questions,
Okay.
I wanted to touch on one more thing about engaging the interviewer.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we were talking about how asking questions can make you stand out and show that you're really interested.
Right. And the podcast actually went a step further.
Oh.
They talked about active listening.
It's not enough to just have, a list of questions.
Yeah.
It's about really listening to what the interviewer is saying.
Right.
And responding in a way that shows you're following along.
Yeah, like in any conversation.
Exactly. Being a good listener is just as important as being a good speaker.
I like that.
So even if you have your questions written down,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to kind of go off script a little bit.
Okay.
If something the interviewer says sparks your interest,
Oh, that's good.
ask a follow-up question or
All right.
make a connection to your own experience.
Okay.
Just show them that you're present and engaged.
Yeah, not just reading off a list.
Exactly.
Okay, well, let's face it, some of those interview questions can be kind of scary.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The ones that are designed to probe a little deeper,
Right.
maybe even make you a little uncomfortable.
They want to see how you handle the pressure.
Okay, so what kind of questions are we talking about?
Well, they talked about questions like, why did you leave your last job?
Oh, yeah, that one's tough.
And can you describe a time when you failed?
Oh, yeah.
And then also those behavioral questions. The ones that start with, tell me about a time when...
Oh, yeah, those are tricky.
But remember, a lot of times, those tougher questions are actually a good sign.
Really?
Yeah, it means they're really interested in you.
Okay.
You're digging deeper, trying to understand how you think, how you solve problems.
Okay.
How you handle those challenging situations.
So it's like they're trying to see the real you.
Exactly, not just the polished version from your resume.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So instead of dreading these questions,
Okay.
let's look at how we can use them to our advantage.
Okay, I'm ready.
Let's start with, why did you leave your last job?
Ooh, that one always feels so loaded.
Yeah, especially if things didn't end so well.
Right.
But honesty is key.
Okay.
And the podcast really stressed the importance of framing your response in a positive light.
Okay.
So instead of dwelling on the negatives, you want to focus on the growth and opportunities you were looking for.
So even if it wasn't the best situation,
Right.
you can still find a way to spin it.
Exactly. So you could say something like, while I learned a lot at my previous role,
Okay.
I was seeking a more collaborative work environment where I could contribute my skills to a larger team.
So you're acknowledging the past, but also emphasizing what you want for the future.
Exactly. And it's important to be prepared to talk about what specifically drew you to this new opportunity.
Right. It shows you've done your research.
Exactly.
Okay, tell me about a time when you failed.
Oh, that one's a classic.
It feels impossible to answer without sounding incompetent.
I know, but the podcast had some really great advice for this one.
Okay.
They suggested using the STAR method.
Okay, the STAR method.
Yeah. Stands for Situation, Task, Action, Result.
Okay, remind me what that means again.
So it's basically a framework for structuring your response.
Okay.
So you're telling a story
Got it.
that's clear and concise and makes an impact.
So instead of just saying, I messed up this project,
Right.
I can use the STAR method to tell a more complete story.
Exactly. You're giving context,
Okay.
explaining your role, detailing the actions you took, and then highlighting the outcome.
Even if it wasn't good.
Right. And most importantly, you emphasize what you learned from the experience.
Okay, so it's about showing that you've grown.
Exactly.
Okay, let's try an example.
Okay.
What if they asked me to describe a time when I failed to meet a deadline?
Okay. Perfect example.
Okay.
So first, you want to set the scene, describe the situation and the task at hand.
Okay, so I could say, in my previous role as a project manager, I was leading a team to develop a new marketing campaign.
Good.
The deadline was really tight and we had a lot of moving parts.
Great. You set the stage.
Okay.
Now describe the actions you took
Okay.
and why you believe they led to missing the deadline.
Okay, so I delegated tasks to my team members, but I underestimated the time it would take to gather feedback and make revisions. As a result, we fell behind schedule and missed the deadline.
Okay. Now comes the crucial part,
Okay.
the result and the lesson learned.
Okay.
So what happened after you missed the deadline
Okay.
and how did you grow from that experience?
All right, so I could say, while we were able to launch the campaign shortly after the deadline, I realized that I needed to improve my time estimation skills and my communication with the team.
Good.
So I started using a project management tool to track progress more effectively.
Okay.
And I implemented regular check-ins to make sure everyone was on the same page.
That's great. So you've acknowledged the mistake,
Right.
but you've also shown that you took responsibility.
Uh-huh.
You learned from it, and you implemented strategies to prevent it from happening again.
Yeah. I see how that changes the whole failure thing.
It's not about being perfect.
Right.
It's about being able to learn and adapt.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's a quality any employer would value.
Okay, this is all making a lot more sense now. But what about those behavioral questions?
Oh, yeah. The ones that are more about,
Right.
your personality.
How you approach things.
Exactly.
Those feel a little tougher.
Yeah, those can be trickier because there's no one right answer.
Right.
But the podcast advice here was to have a few stories ready to go.
Okay.
Stories from your past experiences that highlight the skills and qualities that are relevant to the job.
So like a mental library of interview stories.
Exactly.
Okay.
So think about the key skills they're looking for, and then identify past experiences that showcase those skills.
Okay.
So for example, if you're interviewing for a leadership role,
Yeah.
you might prepare a story about a time when you successfully motivated your team to achieve a goal.
And if it's a customer service role, I could share a story about going above and beyond for a difficult customer.
Exactly. And when you're telling these stories, remember to use the STAR method.
Okay, so even if the question is open-ended, I can use the STAR method to keep my answers structured.
Exactly. It helps you stay focused, tell a concise story,
Yeah.
and highlight the specific skills they're looking for.
This is so helpful.
Good.
I feel like I can actually take control of those tough questions now.
That's the goal.
Is there anything else we need to keep in mind when preparing for these kinds of questions?
Well, the podcast emphasized a couple of key points.
Okay.
First, it's totally okay to pause and take a moment to think before answering.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a great question. Let me think about that for a moment.
Buys you some time.
Exactly. And it shows that you're considering the question carefully.
Okay.
And then also remember to just be authentic and genuine in your responses.
So not trying to force it or sound too rehearsed.
Exactly. The interviewer wants to get to know the real you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So let your personality and your passion shine through.
I'm definitely taking notes.
Good.
But before we wrap up this part of the deep dive,
Okay.
I'm curious about something.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about answering questions, but what about asking them?
Oh, that's a great point. Asking thoughtful questions is just as important.
Okay.
In fact, the podcast spent a lot of time on that topic.
Okay, so what were some of the key takeaways about asking questions?
Well, first and foremost, they emphasize that asking questions shows that you're genuinely interested.
Okay.
It shows you've done your research.
Uh-huh.
You're curious to learn more.
Right.
You're thinking beyond just getting the job.
So it's not just about filling a silence at the end.
Exactly. It's about showing that you're already thinking like a potential employee.
Yeah.
And they had some great advice on how to come up with strong questions.
Okay. I'm all ears.
Okay, so they suggested focusing on questions that demonstrate your understanding of the company's goals,
Okay.
their challenges, their culture.
So instead of asking something generic like, what's the company culture like?
Right.
I should be more specific.
Exactly. You could ask something like, I read about your recent expansion into new markets.
Okay.
What are some of the key challenges you anticipate facing?
Okay. And how will this role contribute to overcoming those challenges?
Oh, that's so much better.
It shows you've done your homework
Yeah,
and you're thinking strategically.
I don't like it.
And another tip they shared was to connect your questions to your own skills and experience.
Okay, so if I have experience in social media marketing, I could ask something like,
Yeah.
I noticed that your social media presence has grown significantly in the past year.
Uh-huh.
What are your plans for continuing that growth, and how do you see this role contributing to those plans?
That's a great question. It highlights your skills,
Okay.
it connects them to their needs,
Mhm.
and it shows that you're thinking about how you can add value.
This is so helpful.
Good. I'm glad.
I'm starting to see how asking the right questions can really make me stand out.
Yeah, it can really elevate your interview game.
Okay, but is there a right time or a wrong time to ask questions?
That's a good question.
Thanks.
The podcast actually addressed that directly,
Okay.
while it's traditional to save questions for the end.
Yeah. They said it's perfectly fine to sprinkle them throughout the conversation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So if something comes up that you're curious about,
Uh-huh.
don't be afraid to ask about it right then and there.
Okay.
It shows that you're listening, you're engaged,
Yeah.
you're genuinely curious.
I used to worry about interrupting,
I know.
but now I see how it can actually make the conversation more dynamic.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance
Okay.
between being respectful of their time
Right.
and showing them that you're a thoughtful and curious candidate.
This has been an amazing deep dive.
Yeah, it's been fun.
I feel like I'm finally starting to understand how to approach these interviews.
I'm glad to hear that.
We've covered so much.
Yeah.
From preparation to tough questions to asking our own questions.
It's a lot to take in.
But there's one more part to this deep dive.
We're not done yet.
Okay, tell me more.
We're going to put all of these strategies into practice
Okay.
with some real-life examples.
Oh, cool.
We'll walk through some common interview scenarios. Uh-huh.
Practice using the phrases and techniques we've talked about
Great.
and really fine-tune our approach
Awesome.
so we can ace those interviews.
Sounds like a plan. I'm ready to put all this knowledge to work.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've talked the talk. Now it's time to walk the walk.
Yeah, let's put all these strategies into practice.
I'm ready to put myself in the hot seat.
Okay, let's imagine you're in that interview and the interviewer says, tell me about yourself.
Okay, deep breath. So I started my career in marketing about 6 years ago, focusing mostly on social media strategy.
Okay.
Currently, I'm at XYZ company, leading a team focused on digital campaign development.
Uh-huh.
I'm really excited about this opportunity because I'm looking to, take my leadership skills to the next level
Okay.
and work for a company that's, really committed to sustainability.
That's great. I think you nailed it.
Really?
Yeah, you clearly outlined your experience, your current role,
Uh-huh.
and most importantly, you connected your aspirations to what you know about the company. Yeah, it really helps to say it out loud.
Absolutely. Practice makes perfect.
Okay, let's try a tougher one.
Okay, bring it on.
What if they ask, can you describe a time when you failed?
All right, time for the STAR method.
Okay, let me think. In my last role, I was managing a pretty complex product launch.
Okay.
We had this crazy tight deadline, and I was in charge of the marketing strategy,
Uh-huh.
coordinating with all the different teams, making sure we were on track.
Okay.
I delegated tasks, but I totally underestimated the time it would take for one of the key deliverables.
Oh, no.
So we had to push back the launch date, which ended up impacting other projects.
That's stressful.
It was, yeah. But I learned a lot from it.
Okay, great.
Realized how important it is to have, a really detailed plan,
Right.
clear communication, and to build in some buffer time.
Absolutely.
Since then, I've been using a project management tool to track everything,
Good.
and I've successfully launched several campaigns on time and within budget.
That's a great example. You really nailed the STAR method. You set the scene, you described your task, the actions you took, and the result.
Right.
But what really stood out was how you talked about the lesson you learned and the positive steps you took to improve.
Yeah, the STAR method really helps.
It does. It keeps things organized and focused.
Okay, well, let's move on to asking questions. I always get a little nervous about this part.
It's understandable, but remember, asking thoughtful questions shows that you're engaged and you've done your homework.
Okay, so how do I make sure my questions don't sound, silly?
Well, let's brainstorm a few based on what we know about this company.
Okay.
We mentioned they have a strong commitment to sustainability, right?
Right.
So instead of just asking, what are your sustainability initiatives?
Right, which is pretty generic.
Exactly.
Mhm.
You could say something like, I read about your partnership with, mention a specific environmental organization.
Yeah.
What are some of the key goals of that partnership? And how do you see this role contributing to those efforts?
Okay, that's so much better.
It's specific, it shows you've done your research,
Yeah.
and it connects your potential role to something they care about.
Okay, that makes me feel more confident.
Good. What if you want to highlight your own experience?
Okay.
Let's say you have a background in data analytics.
Yeah.
And you're interviewing for a marketing role.
Okay, how about this? I'm really passionate about using data to make marketing decisions. Can you tell me more about how your team uses data analytics to measure campaign effectiveness?
Good.
And what opportunities do you see for leveraging data in this role?
That's a fantastic question. It highlights your skills and connects them to their needs.
Awesome.
It shows that you're thinking strategically.
This is all making so much more sense.
I'm glad to hear it.
I feel like I have a whole new toolbox for these interviews.
That's the goal. Remember, preparation is key, but don't forget to just be yourself.
right. Let my personality shine through.
Exactly. And remember, every interview is a learning experience.
Yeah, that's true.
Even if you don't get the job, you'll gain valuable insights.
So it's all about continuous improvement.
Exactly. Now go out there and ace those interviews.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has helped you feel more confident about your English job interviews. Remember, you've got this.
Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.